It was an overcast afternoon when Adam, a young man in his late 20s, found himself wandering through the cluttered aisles of an old second-hand store. The shop, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, was a relic from another time filled with forgotten trinkets, dusty antiques, and strange oddities. Adam wasn't sure why he had decided to visit, but he was drawn to the place almost as though something was calling to him from within. As he perused the shelves, his fingers brushing against porcelain dolls, rusted tools, and old photo frames, a small, weathered box caught his eye. It was tucked away in a corner, half hidden behind stacks of faded vinyl records. The box was made of wood, polished smooth but scratched with age, its brass hinges tarnished. There was something intriguing about it, something that made Adam's curiosity bubble up. He gently opened it, and inside, resting on a bed of old, yellowing cloth, was a small cassette tape. The tape was unlike any Adam had ever seen. It was black, but the label was nearly worn away, its edges curling as though it had been handled countless times. Only a few words were still legible on the label, scrawled in faded red ink: "Do not listen." The warning seemed ominous, a clear sign that this was not a normal cassette tape. Despite this, Adam's intrigue grew stronger. Who would go through the trouble of creating such a mysterious warning? He hesitated for only a moment before picking up the tape. He noticed the weight of it felt odd, almost heavy for its size, as if it contained something more than just music or a simple recording. Perhaps it was an old family recording or a piece of forgotten history. Maybe it had even been a recording of a loved one long gone. Whatever it was, it seemed like it belonged in a place like this, a forgotten relic lost in time. "I'll buy it," Adam told himself, intrigued by the mystery. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a quiet demeanor, gave him a long look as Adam approached the counter. "That's an interesting choice," the old man said in a raspy voice, his gaze lingering on the cassette tape in Adam's hands. "You sure you want to take that one home?" Adam nodded, slightly unnerved by the man's strange question, but the shopkeeper didn't press further. Instead, he simply muttered something about voices from the past before ringing up the tape and sending Adam on his way. Later that evening, after Adam had settled into his small apartment, he sat down in front of his old cassette player. He had no idea why he was so compelled to listen to the tape, but something about it tugged at him, almost as though it were calling him to hear its contents. Maybe it was the mystery, or maybe it was just his natural curiosity, but whatever the reason, he found himself alone in his room, about to play the cassette. With a flick of the switch, the tape began to spin, the familiar click and hum of the cassette player filling the room. At first, there was nothing but static, a deep crackling sound that made Adam's skin prickle with unease. But then, as the tape continued to play, something strange happened. A faint whispering emerged from the static. It was almost imperceptible, but Adam could hear it, soft, barely audible voices distorted by the static. His heart raced. He leaned in closer to the speakers, straining to make out the words, but they were too garbled. It sounded as though multiple voices were speaking at once, overlapping each other, whispering in a language he didn't understand. Then, the whispers began to clear, and one voice in particular started to stand out. It was slow, deliberate, as though it were trying to communicate something important, something urgent. Adam's pulse quickened. The voice seemed to call to him as if it were aware of his presence, aware that he was listening. It was as though the voice was speaking directly to him, telling him things no one else would know. The voice sounded distant, almost as though it were coming from a faraway place, but Adam couldn't shake the feeling that he knew it, that somehow, in some way, this voice was meant for him. As the words became clearer, Adam could make out a name, his own name, spoken softly, followed by a cryptic phrase that sent a chill down his spine. "Find the truth before it's too late." The room seemed to grow colder, and Adam's breath caught in his throat. He hit the stop button on the cassette player, but the whispers continued for a moment in his mind, lingering even after the tape had ceased to play. He sat there, stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The feeling that something was terribly wrong gnawed at him, and yet, at the same time, he felt a strange connection to the voice, a pull to uncover its origin, to understand what it was trying to tell him. The tape had just begun to reveal its mystery, and Adam knew that he could never turn back now. He had to know what lay beyond the whispers, what had happened to this voice, and why it was speaking to him from the other side. Adam sat frozen in his chair, staring at the cassette player. His hand hovered over the stop button, but he couldn't bring himself to press it again. The voice, the one he had heard through the static, still echoed in his mind. It wasn't just the words that haunted him, but the way it seemed to reach out to him, as if it had been waiting for him to listen. He had no idea what was going on, but something told him that this was only the beginning. The feeling that the voice was alive and aware, that it was waiting for him to discover something hidden, gnawed at him. With a deep breath, Adam finally pressed the button to stop the tape, and the faint whispers abruptly ceased. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. For a moment, he just sat there, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread that had taken root in his chest. The voice had felt so real, so present, even though it had come from a recording that was decades old. Adam couldn't explain it. He was used to the idea of paranormal activity, but this was something different. It felt personal. The voice had spoken his name. His hand shook as he reached for the tape, pulling it out of the player and holding it in his palm. It was strange to think that something so simple could carry such an unsettling weight. But this was no ordinary recording. He knew that now. The words, the tone, and the strange aura surrounding the tape felt almost supernatural. Adam's curiosity was now overshadowed by a sense of urgency. He had to find out more. What was the voice trying to say? Why had it called out to him? And who or what was it? There was no going back. He couldn't ignore it. Feeling both anxious and excited, Adam grabbed his laptop and began searching for anything related to the tape or its origins. He searched the brand of the cassette, the markings on the label, and any other possible clues that might lead him to the truth. But there was nothing. No information on any recording that matched the mysterious tape he had found. It was as if the tape had appeared out of nowhere, a ghost from the past with no history. As the hours passed, Adam couldn't shake the strange feeling that the tape was calling to him again, pulling him back to it. Eventually, he gave in, deciding to play it once more. This time, however, he prepared himself. He sat up straighter, turned off the lights, and shut the door to his room. He needed to hear it again to make sense of what was going on. He pressed play. This time, the static was different. It wasn't as overpowering as before, but the distortion was sharper, as though the tape itself was fighting against the sound, resisting whatever message it was carrying. Adam leaned in closer to the speakers, trying to catch every word. Then it came, the whisper again, but this time it was clearer. "Help me." The words were faint, barely audible, but they were unmistakable. Adam's heart skipped a beat. It was as if the voice had suddenly found the strength to speak directly to him, to tell him what it needed. His hands trembled as he adjusted the volume, trying to get the clearest possible playback, but the voice didn't respond to the increase in sound. It remained low, insistent, desperate. "Help me before it's too late." The voice grew more frantic with each repetition, the words spilling out faster, more urgently. Adam's mind raced. Who was this voice? And what was it begging for help from? There was a chilling undertone now, a sense of impending danger that seemed to seep into the room like a dark cloud. The warning was unmistakable. The voice wasn't just reaching out to him, it was asking for intervention, a plea from beyond the grave. But Adam wasn't sure if he could help. Was it possible for a voice from the other side to be truly heard by the living? Was this some sort of trick? A part of him wanted to dismiss it as a hoax, a cleverly designed recording that was meant to evoke fear. But the more he listened, the more real it felt. There was nothing artificial about the desperation in the voice. It was raw, emotional, as if the entity behind it had suffered for years, maybe even decades. As the words continued to loop in his mind, Adam's thoughts grew more tangled. What could he possibly do? He didn't know anyone who could help with something like this. He didn't even know where to start looking. Was there a way to communicate with spirits? Was it even possible to solve the mystery of a voice trapped in time? Adam felt completely lost. The only thing he knew for certain was that he couldn't ignore it. The voice had chosen him for a reason, and the pull to understand it was too strong to resist. It was as though the tape had found its way into his life for a purpose, and Adam was now part of something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. He stopped the tape again, but this time he didn't feel any relief. The room was still thick with the unsettling presence of the voice. Adam's hands were clammy, his thoughts racing. He could no longer push the voice out of his mind. It had become a part of him, and he knew deep down that he had to follow its trail, no matter where it led. The next morning, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He spent the entire day trying to push thoughts of the tape out of his head, but the voice lingered in his mind. He couldn't forget the pleading words that had echoed through his room the night before. The recording was no longer just a curious artifact, it had become a chilling mystery that he couldn't ignore. Who was the voice? What did it want? And why had it chosen him? Despite his growing unease, Adam felt an overwhelming need to understand more about the voice. He couldn't help but feel that the answers were buried within the tape, hidden behind the static and distortion. But there was one thing that kept bothering him. He had no idea who the voice belonged to. He pulled the tape out of its case again, examining it closely. The label, now even more faded than before, offered no answers. It seemed to have been labeled with care, but the only visible part of the text still readable was the cryptic warning, "Do not listen." But the voice on the recording, that haunting whisper, had been unmistakable. He could still hear it clearly in his mind. "Help me." It had been a voice from beyond the grave and it had spoken directly to him. But whose voice was it? Adam decided to play the tape one more time. As the familiar sound of static filled the air, he pressed his ear closer to the speakers. This time, he listened more intently, trying to catch anything that could give him a clue about the identity of the voice. But instead of a clear message, the recording seemed to be fragmented, more distorted than ever before. At first, it sounded like multiple voices overlapping one another, murmuring indistinctly in the background. Then, the familiar voice he had heard before cut through the static once again, but this time, it sounded different. The voice seemed less desperate, more calm, almost as if it had gained some clarity. The words it spoke were still difficult to understand, but there was one phrase that stood out: find the one who knows. Adam frowned. Find the one who knows? Who could that be? And why was the voice asking him to find someone else? It didn't make sense. The voice had been so focused on him the night before, pleading for help, warning him of something. But now it seemed as if there was another piece to the puzzle. Maybe the voice was trying to guide him to someone else, someone who could provide the answers Adam was desperately seeking. He couldn't help but feel a deep, gnawing sense of confusion. Who was this voice? He had heard it clearly, and yet it felt like he didn't know it at all. The voice wasn't familiar, not in any way. There was no recognition, no connection to anyone he knew in his life. It didn't sound like any relative, friend, or even acquaintance. The more he listened, the more Adam realized that he didn't have any clues about who it could be. The voice was foreign to him, a mystery wrapped in layers of static and distortion. It was clear that the person or entity behind the voice had a message, but it wasn't just the voice itself that was important. It was the message it carried. Adam knew that in order to truly understand what was happening, he would have to follow the cryptic instruction. Find the one who knows. But where did he even begin? Feeling both apprehensive and determined, Adam decided to start by reaching out to people who might have some knowledge of the tape or the voice. The thought of contacting a paranormal expert or historian crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed the idea. He wasn't ready to involve anyone else yet. Not until he had more answers. Instead, he decided to start by asking around his own circle of friends and family to see if anyone had heard of the voice or knew anything about the tape. He started with his older sister, Emma, who had always been the more superstitious of the two. She had a fascination with the paranormal and had read countless books on ghosts, spirits, and the supernatural. She might have heard of something similar before. Adam hesitated for a moment before dialing her number. As the phone rang, he felt a sense of urgency rise within him. "Hey, it's me," Adam said when she picked up. "I found something strange and I need your help." "What is it this time?" Emma's voice was amused but curious. "I came across this old tape and I think there's something strange about it." "Old tape? Like a cassette?" she asked. "Yeah, but it's not just any tape. When I played it, I heard a voice I don't recognize. It said my name. It's kind of unsettling. And then it said something about finding the one who knows." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Emma didn't respond immediately and Adam began to feel nervous. Maybe he had said too much too soon. Maybe she would think he was overreacting, that it was just some weird coincidence. "That's definitely strange," she finally said, her tone much more serious now. "You need to be careful, Adam. Sometimes these old recordings, they can bring things up, things that you can't control." "I know," Adam admitted, "but I can't stop thinking about it." The voice seemed like it was trying to tell me something. Emma was quiet for a moment and Adam could almost hear her thinking. Then she spoke again. "You should go to the old library in town. There's a historian there, Mrs. Larkin. She knows all kinds of local folklore and stories about things like this. If anyone knows anything about the tape, it'll be her." Adam's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the one who knows the voice had spoken of? Mrs. Larkin had lived in the town for decades and was known for her vast knowledge of local history and strange occurrences. Maybe she could help him unlock the mystery behind the voice. "I'll go there tomorrow," Adam said, feeling a surge of hope. He had a lead. Maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. The next day, Adam made his way to the local library. It was an old building with dark wooden shelves filled with rows of dusty books that seemed to carry the weight of generations. The smell of aged paper and leather bindings filled the air, and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound that broke the silence. The library had always had an eerie yet comforting presence, its brick walls having stood through decades of history. Today, it felt even more foreboding. As Adam walked past the rows of bookshelves, he finally spotted Mrs. Larkin sitting at a small desk near the back of the library. She was an elderly woman, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes sharp and inquisitive despite her age. Mrs. Larkin had always been a fixture in the town, and Adam knew her reputation for knowing things that others didn't. If anyone could help him understand the strange voice on the tape, it was her. "Mrs. Larkin?" Adam called softly, approaching her desk. She looked up, and her sharp eyes seemed to scan him for a moment before she spoke. Well, Adam Parker. I wasn't expecting to see you here. What brings you to my corner of the library today?" Adam hesitated for a moment, then placed the cassette tape on the desk in front of her. He could feel his heartbeat quicken as he watched her face carefully. Mrs. Larkin's gaze lingered on the tape for a few seconds, and he could have sworn that a flicker of recognition passed through her eyes. But it was gone in an instant. "I found this," Adam began, his voice trembling slightly. "And when I played it, I heard a voice. It had said my name, and it asked for help. It said something about finding the one who knows. I thought you might be able to help me understand what's going on." Mrs. Larkin's expression softened, and she gave him a long, measuring look. She didn't speak immediately, her fingers gently tracing the edges of the tape as if she were carefully considering something. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "There's an old story in this town," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of experience and something else, something that Adam couldn't quite place. "A story that's been passed down for generations. Not many remember it now, but it's tied to the land and the people who used to live here. The ones who were different." "Different?" Adam asked, his interest piqued. "Yes," she continued, her eyes growing distant as she spoke. "There was a family, long ago, who lived at the edge of town. They were known for their strange ways, their ability to communicate with things beyond the veil. People said they could speak to spirits, hear things that the living couldn't. Some called them witches, others called them mediums. But one thing was certain, they were connected to the other side." Adam's heart raced. This sounded like it could be the key to the mystery. Could the voice on the tape be from one of these people? From someone who had the ability to communicate with the dead? Mrs. Larkin paused, looking directly into Adam's eyes. There was one in particular, a woman named Clara Voss. She was the most powerful of them all, and she disappeared under strange circumstances. No one ever knew what happened to her. Some say she was taken by the very forces she had been in contact with. Others say she died trying to communicate with a spirit she couldn't control. But the truth is buried. And there are some things that have been forgotten for a reason. Adam felt a chill run down his spine. Could this Clara Voss be the one the voice was referring to? The one who knows? "Do you think this voice could be Clara's?" Adam asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Larkin didn't answer right away. She stood up from her chair, walking to a nearby shelf filled with old journals and books. She pulled one of the thick, leather-bound volumes from the shelf and opened it carefully as though it were a precious artifact. She flipped through the pages, muttering to herself as she searched for something. Finally, she stopped and pointed to a passage. "There it is," she said, showing Adam the page. "This is a record from one of the town's elders, someone who knew Clara well. It says that Clara Voss had a special connection to the other side, a connection that allowed her to communicate with spirits. But there was one rule, one that she broke. She was warned never to attempt to speak to the spirit of someone who had died violently, someone whose death had not been natural." Adam frowned, trying to process the information. And what happened if she broke that rule? Some believe that when she tried to contact the spirit of a young man who had died under mysterious circumstances, someone who had been violently murdered, she opened a door that should have remained closed. Clara's spirit, some say, is still trapped in that place, caught between the world of the living and the world of the dead. And it's possible that her voice has been reaching out to people ever since. Adam's mind was racing. Could it be that the voice on the tape was Clara Voss herself? Was the spirit trying to communicate with him, to warn him of something? And if she had been trapped between the worlds for all these years, could Adam be the one to finally help her find peace? "Do you think Clara could still be out there?" Adam asked, his voice tinged with hope. Mrs. Larkin's gaze softened and she nodded slowly. "I do. I think the spirit of Clara Voss is still trying to reach someone. And I think she's reached you." Adam took a deep breath, feeling a strange mixture of fear and determination. He had to find the truth. He had to uncover what had happened to Clara Voss and, if possible, help her cross over. But how? Where would he even begin to search for the answers? As if reading his thoughts, Mrs. Larkin spoke again. "There's a place where Clara was last seen, the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. It's said that if you go there, you may hear her voice again. But be careful, Adam. Some doors, once open, should never be closed." Adam nodded, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He was on the verge of uncovering a truth that had been hidden for decades, and he couldn't back down now. The air was thick with anticipation as Adam stood before the old cemetery, the gate creaking eerily in the breeze. It was a place that most of the town avoided, shrouded in superstition and mystery. Few ventured here, and even fewer ever returned with anything but unsettling stories. The cemetery was small, with crooked tombstones and overgrown vines that seemed to wrap around the graves like the fingers of a long-forgotten hand. Time had clearly taken its toll on this place, but it also seemed to preserve an air of secrecy, one that Adam was determined to uncover. Clutching the cassette tape in his hand, Adam hesitated at the gate. The words of Mrs. Larkin echoed in his mind, "Be careful, Adam. Some doors, once open, should never be closed." But he had come this far. He couldn't back down now. The voice on the tape, the strange message about the one who knows, and now the connection to Clara Voss, everything seemed to lead him here, to this forgotten resting place. Adam pushed the gate open, the rusted hinges groaning in protest as they let him in. A chill ran through the air, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. The cemetery felt alive with its own energy, a quiet hum that seemed to vibrate from the very ground beneath his feet. It was as if the earth itself held secrets that no one had been able to understand or explain for generations. As he walked deeper into the cemetery, Adam tried to ignore the feeling of eyes watching him, the oppressive presence that seemed to grow stronger with every step he took. The voices in his head were growing louder now, whispering in fragments as if trying to tell him something. "Find her, she's waiting." He couldn't shake the feeling that Clara Voss was here, somewhere, watching him, guiding him towards something. But what was it? What did she want from him? After a few minutes of walking, Adam came upon an old, worn gravestone. It was different from the others, newer, less decayed, and there, etched into the stone, was the name Clara Voss. The moment Adam laid his eyes on the gravestone, his heart seemed to skip a beat. He had found her. This was the woman, the one who had reached out to him through the tape. The realization hit him like a wave, and for a moment he stood there frozen, staring at the grave, unable to move. He took a deep breath, gathering the courage to kneel in front of the stone. The wind around him had died down, and the cemetery was unnervingly still. The only sound was the distant rustling of leaves. Adam pulled out the tape again and placed it next to him on the grave, pressing play. The familiar static filled the air, and then the voice came clearer this time, but still distant, as if it were being transmitted from a great distance. "Help me. Please, you must help me." Adam's heart raced as the voice spoke once more. This time it was even more desperate, more urgent. He could hear the pain in the words, the lingering sorrow of a spirit trapped between worlds. There was something about the way the voice trembled, like it was reaching out from the depths of an abyss. It was Clara Voss, and she needed him to do something he still didn't fully understand. Suddenly there was a strange distortion in the recording, followed by a long, drawn-out sigh. The voice on the tape seemed to crack, as if it was struggling to hold onto its form. "I am not at rest," it whispered. "The door was never closed, and now I cannot leave." Adam's blood ran cold. This was it, the confirmation he had been seeking. Clara's spirit had never crossed over. She was trapped here, bound to the cemetery, unable to find peace. And now it seemed that her only hope lay with him. The tape clicked off abruptly, and Adam was left in eerie silence. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. What had Clara meant when she said the door was never closed? What was he supposed to do now? He wasn't a medium or a spiritual guide, he didn't have any knowledge of how to help a trapped spirit. But he knew that he couldn't just walk away. He had to try. "Clara," he whispered into the stillness of the cemetery. "I'm here. I'll help you." No response came at first. The wind had picked up again, but there was something different about it now. It felt charged, as if the very air was trembling with anticipation. Adam stood up, looking around. The world around him seemed to shift, the shadows lengthening, the sky darkening with an ominous storm that seemed to be gathering. A distant voice, soft but unmistakable, whispered his name. Adam, it was Clara. He could feel her presence now, as if she was standing right next to him, her energy weaving through the space around him. "Clara, what do you need me to do?" Adam called out, his voice breaking the silence. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble slightly, and then, in the distance, a faint light appeared. It wasn't the soft glow of the moon or the flickering of distant stars. It was something different, something otherworldly. Adam felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as though the light was calling to him, beckoning him forward. Without thinking, Adam began walking toward the light. Each step felt heavy, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. The air was thick with tension, and the temperature dropped sharply, sending a shiver down his spine. He couldn't explain why, but he knew that this light was the key. He had to reach it, no matter the cost. The light grew brighter the closer he got, illuminating a small, hidden path that wound through the trees. Adam's heart pounded in his chest as he followed the path, each step bringing him closer to whatever lay at the end. He felt a presence beside him now, Clara's spirit, guiding him. And then, as he reached the end of the path, he saw something that would change everything. As Adam reached the end of the narrow, overgrown path, he stood before a strange, weathered door. It was out of place in the middle of the cemetery, as though it had been forgotten by time itself. The door was made of old, gnarled wood, its surface marked with deep, intricate carvings, symbols, and patterns that Adam couldn't recognize. The air around it hummed with an eerie energy, vibrating as if the door itself were alive. For a moment, Adam stood frozen, staring at the door. His instincts told him to turn back, that this was a threshold that should never be crossed. But the pull from the other side was too strong. He could feel Clara's presence now more than ever, urging him to step forward. Her voice, soft and desperate, whispered through the stillness of the night. "It's the only way. Open it. Please." Adam's heart raced. He knew that opening the door was a dangerous decision, one that could have unforeseen consequences. But the look on Clara's face, the desperation in her voice, left him with little choice. He had to try. Taking a deep breath, he reached out and grasped the cold, iron handle. The moment his fingers touched it, a shock ran through his body, and the wind around him picked up, swirling in a frenzy. The door creaked loudly, as though protesting, but it slowly began to give way. With a groan, it opened, revealing a dark void beyond it. Adam hesitated, his mind swirling with a mix of fear and determination. He glanced back once more, half expecting to see Mrs. Larkin or someone else standing behind him, but there was no one. He was alone, with only the distant whispers of Clara guiding him forward. The air beyond the door felt cold, unnaturally so, as if he were stepping into another world entirely. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming stillness. Adam stepped across the threshold, and as soon as he did, the world around him seemed to shift. The cemetery, the trees, the graves, they all vanished, replaced by an expanse of swirling mist and shadow. It was as if he had entered a space outside of time, a liminal place where the rules of reality no longer applied. The ground beneath his feet was soft, as if he were walking on thick fog, and the atmosphere was dense, oppressive. The mist seemed to pulse and writhe, as if something was moving within it, something hidden just beyond his reach. And in the distance, Adam could make out faint shapes, figures, perhaps, drifting in and out of sight. "Clara," Adam called out, his voice trembling in the stillness. A moment of silence followed before her voice echoed back to him, clear and strong. "I'm here. I've been waiting." The mist parted and Adam saw her. Clara Voss. She was standing before him, her figure bathed in a faint, ghostly glow. Her features were blurred, but he could make out her sorrowful expression, the pain etched on her face. She was beautiful yet broken, her form shifting as if she were struggling to maintain her shape in this strange place. "Clara," Adam said, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened to you? Why are you trapped here?" Clara's form flickered, her eyes meeting his with a look of profound sadness. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice soft, but heavy with regret. "I opened the door. I spoke to a spirit I shouldn't have, and now I cannot leave." Adam stepped closer, his heart aching for her. He had felt her pain from the moment he first heard her voice, but seeing her now, trapped in this otherworldly space, made it all the more real. She was lost, caught between the worlds of the living and the dead, and the door that had once been her means of communication was now her prison. "I don't understand," Adam said, his voice desperate. "What do you mean? How can I help you? What do you need?" Clara took a deep breath, and for a moment, her form seemed to solidify. The mist around them began to thin, and the eerie glow surrounding her grew brighter, illuminating the space around them. "You must close the door," she said. "You must shut it, Adam. Only then can I find peace. But it will not be easy. The forces that hold me here do not want me to go. They will fight you." Adam's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of her words sank in. Closing the door meant that he would have to confront whatever dark forces were keeping Clara bound to this place. But he couldn't leave her here, trapped in the void forever. He had to try. "I'll do it," Adam said firmly, despite the fear gnawing at him. "I'll close the door. I won't let you stay here." Clara's gaze softened, and for a moment, the sorrow in her eyes seemed to lift. "Thank you, Adam," she whispered. "But be warned, once you open the door to this world, it will never be fully closed. Some part of it will always remain, and you may feel it, hear it, long after I am gone." Adam nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He knew that once he crossed this threshold, nothing would ever be the same. But he had come this far, and he couldn't back down now. Clara needed him, and he couldn't turn away from that. The mist around them began to swirl more violently, and the air grew colder. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the space, like the growl of something far away, something angry. Adam knew that the forces Clara had spoken of were closing in, and that time was running out. "Clara," Adam said, looking at her one last time. "Thank you for trusting me. I'll help you." With those words, he turned back toward the door. It was still standing, its eerie glow pulsating in the distance. He could hear the faint whisper of wind on the other side, and the weight of the decision he was about to make pressed down on him. With a final glance at Clara's fading form, Adam stepped back through the door, leaving the strange, ethereal realm behind. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him, and the world around him seemed to shift once more. The door slammed shut behind Adam with a deafening crash, shaking the ground beneath his feet. His breath hitched as he spun around, but the cemetery was gone. He was standing in the same place, yet everything felt different. The oppressive atmosphere, the eerie silence, it was all still there, but now it seemed charged with a malevolent presence, something dark, something angry. The air was thick with tension, and the weight of the moment bore down on him. Clara's voice still echoed in his mind, "Once you open the door, it will never be fully closed." Adam's hands trembled as he realized the truth of her words. The door had been shut, but something from the other side had followed him back, something that didn't want to be sealed away. He turned back toward the old cemetery gate, his heart pounding. A strange force seemed to pull at him, urging him to run, to escape before whatever he had unleashed came for him. But he couldn't move. His feet felt like they were rooted to the ground, as if the very earth itself was holding him in place. And then he heard it. A low, guttural growl rumbled from behind him, and Adam spun around, his eyes wide with fear. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the shadows of the trees twisting and warping, as if they were alive, shifting in unnatural ways, closing in on him. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath him seemed to ripple, as if the cemetery itself were alive, breathing with a dark, malicious energy. He wasn't alone. The shadows coalesced into shapes, figures, dark and formless, emerging from the mist. They moved slowly, deliberately, their movements jerky and unnatural. Adam's breath quickened as he realized that they weren't human, or even alive. These were the things that had been bound to Clara, the forces that had trapped her in that realm, and now they were here, free and seeking revenge. "You shouldn't have opened the door," one of the figures hissed, its voice like 1,000 whispers, all distorted and distorted, layered on top of each other. Adam took a step back, his heart racing, but the shadows closed in around him, cutting off his escape. Fear surged through him, but it was quickly replaced by something else, determination. He had come here to help Clara, and he wasn't about to let these creatures drag her back into the darkness. He had to find a way to close the door completely, to sever the connection between this world and whatever malevolent force lurked on the other side. The growls of the shadowy figures grew louder, and Adam felt a sharp chill as one of them reached out toward him, its fingers elongated and twisted like gnarled branches. He dodged, barely managing to avoid its touch, but the creature's claws grazed his arm, leaving a cold, burning sensation that made him gasp. He had to act quickly. His eyes darted around the cemetery, searching for anything that could help him. That's when he saw it, an old stone circle, partially hidden by the overgrown weeds and vines. It looked like a place of ritual, ancient and forgotten, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Adam's instincts screamed at him to go there, to use whatever power the stone circle held to break the hold of the shadow creatures. Without thinking, Adam bolted toward the circle, the figures close behind him, their growls reverberating in his chest. His legs burned as he pushed himself faster, the sound of their pursuit growing louder, but he refused to stop. He had to reach the circle. When he finally arrived, he slid to a stop in the center, his body trembling with adrenaline. He looked down at the stones, their strange carvings etched into the surface. There were 4 in total, each positioned at a cardinal point, and in the center a symbol, a spiral that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Adam didn't know what to do, but he felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. He reached out and touched the symbol, and as soon as his fingers made contact, the ground beneath him rumbled. A flash of light exploded from the center of the circle, sending a wave of energy through the cemetery. The shadows recoiled, their forms twisting and screeching in fury as the light intensified. The figures lunged at Adam, but he stood his ground, his hands still pressed against the symbol. The light grew brighter, the air crackling with power, and then, with a deafening roar, the shadows were thrown back. They vanished into the mist, their screeches fading into the distance. Adam collapsed to his knees, panting, his heart racing. The ground beneath him settled and the oppressive energy lifted, leaving the cemetery still and silent once more. For a moment he could hear nothing but his own breath. But then a soft whisper echoed in the air just behind him. "Thank you." Adam's head snapped around, and there, standing at the edge of the stone circle, was Clara. She was no longer a ghostly figure but a glowing, ethereal presence, peaceful, free. The darkness that had clung to her was gone, and in its place was a soft, gentle light. "I did it," Adam whispered, his voice barely audible. Clara smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You closed the door, Adam. You freed me. You saved me." Tears welled up in his eyes as he looked at her. For the first time since he had heard her voice on the tape, he felt a deep sense of peace. Clara was free, and the darkness that had haunted her and him was finally gone. As the mist began to clear and the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Clara took one last, lingering look at Adam. "Goodbye," she whispered softly, her form fading into the light. "Thank you." And then she was gone. The cemetery was quiet again, the shadows gone, and the door closed for good. Adam stood alone in the center of the stone circle, his heart heavy but relieved. He had faced the darkness and come out on the other side, and in doing so he had freed not only Clara but himself as well. The morning light crept through the trees, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The air was crisp, and the silence that had once been oppressive now felt soothing, like a weight had been lifted from the world. Adam stood in the center of the stone circle, his body weary but his mind clear. The storm had passed, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was alone with his thoughts. But despite the peace surrounding him, something lingered in the back of his mind, an unsettling thought that wouldn't let go. Clara was free now, but the world she had inhabited, the space between life and death, was still there. And Adam had opened a door to it. No matter how much he wanted to believe that the door had been sealed for good, a small voice inside him whispered that the boundary between the living and the dead would never be the same. Some part of that otherworldly place would always remain, a lingering echo in the corners of his mind. Adam took a deep breath, his fingers brushing against the cold, smooth stones of the circle. He knew that closing the door had been the right choice, that he had saved Clara and freed her from the darkness she had been trapped in. But as the mist around him began to dissipate, he realized that the door he had opened could never be fully closed. The connection between the two worlds would forever exist, and the echoes of the other side would continue to whisper just out of reach. Suddenly, Adam's thoughts were interrupted by a soft, familiar voice, one he had hoped never to hear again. "Adam." He froze. The voice was gentle but clear, like a soft breeze in the stillness of the morning. He turned slowly, his heart skipping a beat, and there, standing at the edge of the cemetery, was Clara. But this time she wasn't glowing with ethereal light. She was real, solid, her hair blowing slightly in the wind, her eyes full of warmth and gratitude. Adam's breath caught in his throat. "Clara." She smiled at him, her presence both comforting and haunting. "You did it, Adam. You saved me. Thank you." Her words were soft, and the sincerity in her voice was undeniable. But as she spoke, Adam felt a strange sensation, a pull, an ache deep in his chest, as if part of him was still tethered to the other side. He could feel the connection between them even though Clara was now standing before him in the flesh. The door had been closed, but the fabric of reality felt thinner than ever, like it could tear apart at any moment. Clara's gaze softened, and for a moment she seemed to hesitate. "I'm not really here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not in the way you think. I can't stay." Adam's heart dropped. He reached out, desperate to hold on to the fleeting image of her. "What do you mean? You're here, I can see you. You're real." Clara shook her head, her smile tinged with sadness. "I'm real to you, Adam, but not to this world. I've crossed over. I'm free, but I can't stay." Adam's mind raced. He wanted to reach for her, to beg her not to go, but he knew deep down that she was right. The connection had been severed, and yet it hadn't. Something in the air, something between the living and the dead, still bound them together. With a final, soft smile, Clara began to fade. "Goodbye, Adam. Thank you for everything." Her voice was barely audible now, as if carried away on the wind. "No." Adam cried out, his heart aching with an emptiness he had never known before. He reached forward, but Clara was already gone, slipping away like a dream that was fading at dawn. The cemetery was silent once more, the world around Adam feeling both whole and incomplete. The door to the other side had been closed, but the echoes of that world would continue to linger, reverberating through his mind. The voice that had once called to him through the recording, the voice that had led him to Clara, would never fully disappear. He would carry it with him for the rest of his life, the sound of something from beyond, something that no one could fully understand. And as Adam stood there, alone in the quiet cemetery, he realized that some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed. The thin veil between the living and the dead would always remain, and the voices from the other side would continue to whisper just beyond reach. He had freed Clara, but he could never free himself from the echoes of the other side. 17.